broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Okay, everybody, thank you very much once again for joining us today for KeyDigital webinar series. We're so glad you decided to join us to educate yourselves on some of the happenings with integration of new 4K UHD, HDMI sources and content with extremely high bandwidth totaling 18 gigabits per second. KeyDigital's released some new products that address the needs of professional systems integrators who have to integrate 18G sources into new systems, but even more typically into existing video systems or using with products that may not be that full 18 gigabits per second because as you know, there's a lot of product out there at this point in time that is still supporting 10.2 gigabits per second bandwidth. So the presentation should be rather short today, about 20 minutes time or so. And then we are going to have a brief question and answer segment at the end of the presentation. So please just hold on to your questions until the end of the webinar. We've found that that is the best way to field those from you, and the best way for us to ensure that everybody's questions are answered. So send them over to us using the GoToMeetings panel. You could send your questions our way, and we'd be happy to get to those all at the end of the presentation. So we're going to begin the webinar just by accounting for the needs of systems where we're looking at utilizing 18 gigabits per second sources into equipment and into extenders, switchers, distribution systems that may have equipment that's not full 18G. And of course, this creates a problem because the latest HDMI standards, if you're maxing out all of the parameters of the latest HDMI standards, your total bandwidth is going to be 18 gigabits per second. So what are these parameters we account for? Well, video resolution, if you're going full 4096 by 2160, so UHD or 4K even, resolution at 60 frames per second. If your chroma subsampling, color sampling is 444 as opposed to 420, 400. And what's really important here is looking for HDR content, high dynamic range content or signal, which does give a noticeable improvement to picture quality. In order for your source device that is HDR compatible to output that signal, then it must receive a handshake for 12-bit deep color as well. So all of these parameters, resolution, frame rate, color sampling, deep color, and HDR, if all those things are maxed out there, you could end up with an 18 gigabit per second signal. And that creates a problem because some of the old systems that are out there, and I mean, you really can't even call them old. A lot of existing systems out there are support a maximum bandwidth of 10.2 gigabits per second. So we've actually now finally done it where in the video side of the industry, the content has eclipsed the technology. And you're seeing a time right now where manufacturers have to adjust to this because it does change so rapidly. Manufacturers have to evaluate what will be their market approach. You know, many manufacturers have to weigh the pros and cons of being on, let's say, the bleeding edge of the technology versus accommodating the bulk requirements of their applications. I think that at this point in time, 18 gigabits per second signal is more of a need on a residential installation. For the most part, by quantity or by percentage, let's say. However, based on commercial systems, we know that they will adapt to that 18 gigabits per second infrastructure. KeyDigital wants to be there for that. And we also know that on the commercial side, it's not to say that there aren't very heavy signal requirements when you're dealing with data applications where very fine resolution is required, or some content in museum applications and these sorts of things. The content can be very high still, the bandwidth of that content, let's say. But technologies such as HDBaseT, which, speaking to the rapid evolution of distributed video, HDBaseT technology really became widely adapted just a little over 5 years ago at the time of this webinar. You know, maybe more like 6 or 7 years perhaps, but not 10 years ago, that's for certain. And so that was a technology that was widely accepted because it was so good, because it is so good, because it brought so much reliability to an ecosystem where every manufacturer had their own proprietary extension method over cat wiring, typically requiring 2 cat cables to be used, where you'd have a bouquet of wiring depending on what you needed to extend. And HDBaseT came out at the time with their 5-play platform, the reliable technology. We were all there, or many of us were there for that. And so that's why that HDBaseT technology became so widely accepted and utilized by many manufacturers, not just KeyDigital, but their competitors as well. However, HDBaseT technology was previously only capable of supporting a maximum bandwidth of 10.2 gigabits per second. HDMI chipsets, well, if we rewind only about 5 years ago, we will see the introduction of HDMI 1.4 standard, which is where 4K video resolution was introduced, wasn't it? And with that introduction of HDMI 1.4, there were 4 parameters of that standard. You had 3D, if you recall. That was a big selling point for monitors. However, died out not too much later. You had audio return channel, which sounds great on paper for certain applications, but we saw many of the large manufacturers in the industry quickly turn that technology into a proprietary technology where it's only supported within the same brand as opposed to widely supported, because it does utilize CEC, the CEC chip or pin of HDMI, and so that became proprietary rather quickly. You also saw Ethernet over HDMI, which it was probably, depending on who you ask, not really widely required or supported. But then lastly, 4K resolution, which was able to be delivered to the market in a way that required only 10.2 gigabits per second because we were looking at 4K at 24 or 30 frames per second, not at 60 frames per second. So where your 18 gigabits per second bandwidth calculation, and we rewind to the different requirements of and parameters that can stack up to add and a sum of 18 gigabits per second. Frame rate is one of those, and if you think about it, simply just going from 60 frames per second to 30 will reduce your 18 gigabit per second signal to half of that bandwidth. So the 4K resolution became a something that is widely then sought after 3D, and with that new opportunity came new standards applied for that 4K resolution, and that's where we turn the page to HDMI 2.0A with 4K at 60 frames per second, and the new copyright protection encryption to go along with it, HDCP 2.2. So the just kind of a storyline, if you will, or a timeline of the different of the revolution or the evolution of HDMI, which has led us here, and so these technologies, which are very good, very reliable, had become eclipsed, and KeyDigital has created a fix for these problems. KeyDigital, of course, a manufacturer that along that timeline as I described to you a moment ago, we created a previous fixer that was a very popular product of ours, still released, still in the market, KD Fix 22, and this is now the new product, the next generation fixer, the KD Fix 418. This product will solve your 18G to 10G bandwidth conversion problems, integration problems. It has the ability to compress and decompress. We're going to go over all of these features and these modes of operation. It is USB powered because it is so small, fully compliant with HDCP 2.2. And this is going to be a way for you to resolve those 18 gigabit per second integration issues. So what are these integration issues? And the tools that KeyDigital gives you to correct those issues. Well, using the control rotary on Fix 418, we can activate 18G to 10.2G down convert mode. We set the control rotary to 4, 5, 6, or 7. You're going to need to use that whenever a new 18G source is introduced into a system with either 10.2 gigabit per second infrastructure, such as extenders, matrix, or even displays, and you want to display that source that's outputting at 18 gigabits per second into that system. You could activate the down convert mode, and that activates the chip in the Fix 418. It'll actually use color sampling, the 444 color sampling, and it will down convert that color sampling from 444 to a lower sampling, so that that signal is compatible through the infrastructure, but also compatible with a 10.2 gigabit per second display. So you can view that 4K content on that display. So we've had folks now use this for exactly the application diagram that you see here. We've also had folks use this with 18 gigabit per second distribution amplifiers from KeyDigital, our DA1x2, DA1x4, or DA1x8, to send the 18G signal at 18G to 18G compatible infrastructure and displays, and then down convert to 10G to be sent through the 10G infrastructure and displays. So this becomes a very handy tool, something that needs to be considered when adding new sources into systems. And mind you, we all love the opportunity to design these systems up front, and that helps prevent as much trouble and headache as possible. But keep in mind, sometimes end users just go grab these sources without accounting for, is it going to be compatible with my existing system? So having this on hand at all times will ensure you don't run into any issues there. Another mode of the Fix 418 is compression mode. Now these units are sold individually, just one at a time, but you can use two units together in order to accept an 18G incoming signal, compress it so that it is then output at 10.2 gigabits per second. Now this is not the conversion mode. This is compression. It is different. What we do to the signal is different here. So then it has to be received by a second Fix 418 that is set to decompress mode on the control rotary. Those settings are viewed in the bottom left corner of your screen now. And now your 18G signal is viewed at 18G on your display. However, you can use existing infrastructure like long HDMI cables, existing HDBaseT extenders, and more to extend that signal at 10.2 gigabits per second, not 18 gigabits per second, which would be too heavy of a bandwidth. So this is a second mode that is very useful for integrating Fix 418, or another reason you would use the KD Fix 418. And then there are also the traditional signal correction uses. We take a look at the top diagram here, where it happens many times that you have an 18G source and an 18G display, but perhaps your cabling or AV receivers in line that also claim to be 18G just don't seem to have all of the handlings down pat. We do see this very often with AV receivers, that the AV receiver will output a signal that is just not strong enough to make it over the long HDMI cables. Well, KeyDigital does make full 18 gigabit per second cables all the way up to 75 feet long. All of our Pro G HDMI cables. And so inserting the Fix 418 in line will help get that signal where it needs to be in order to support, or to have a good picture on the display displaying that 18 gigabit per second signal. So that would be something you could use if you experience any kind of artifacts on your screen or lost pixels on your screen. Minor but not severe HDMI problems can be repaired with the Fix 418. Another mode of use is as an HDMI extender. So you could actually put two long cables in a row with the Fix 418 in the middle. Now this is supported at only 10.2 gigabits per second signal, not at 18G. So this is important because sometimes folks have used our fixers in the past for with two long cables, but now that the bandwidth is so heavy, that signal handling is so important, and so this mode of use is only possible with a 10.2 gigabits per second signal. And lastly, we have the input boost mode for the Fix 418, where a long HDMI cable is used, and you can put it at the end of that cable to ensure that, once again, you don't have any artifacts or slight flickering. So this can repair that incoming signal for proper display. Setting the control rotary to setting 2, 3, 6, 7, A, B, E, or F. And all of those settings are outlined in the owner's manual. So that's the Fix 418, a unit that will help you integrate into existing 10G systems, help you resolve 18G connectivity problems. However, we talked about how great HDBaseT technology is. So what have we done here at KeyDigital and as a whole to update that technology to accommodate the highest bandwidth signals, 18G, that are out there? So KeyDigital now has released our KDX444L. This is an extender set with full 18 gigabits per second bandwidth support. Whereas again, all previous HDBaseT was a maximum of 10.2 gigabits per second. KDX444L is a full 18 gigabit per second signal extension. Supports 30 frames, 444 color sampling, 12-bit. You stack those things up, they'll give you 18G or 60 frames, 444 8-bit color depth, okay, with HDR. Now the L in this model number stands for long, because this is also much further extension than previous models. We could do 4K at 70 meters, 1080p at 100 meters, or we can activate long range mode using the control rotary of these sets. And at long range mode, we could send 1080p 500 feet, 152 meters, but long range mode, when enabled, the extender does not support 4K. So it's a different use for the same part. Another cool feature of this product is that only one end requires a power supply. You do see connection options on both ends, so it's flexible. You could choose where you'd like to plug in. They have both IR and RS-232 that can be carried along with the signal. And it's a small, low-profile chassis. So you say, okay, well, now you're telling me HDBaseT can send 18 gigabits per second. What changed? Well, what happened was, if you recall, let's rewind back to the Fix 418's compression mode, where you had to compress and decompress, where you had two sets or two Fix 418 units used, and you were able to take an 18G signal, compress it down to 10.2 gigabits per second, for that is the maximum bandwidth of the HDBaseT over Cat5e, Cat6 pipe that was there. And then the second unit can decompress that signal back to 18 gigabits per second. And this looks pretty similar to that diagram, doesn't it? Because that's the exact same thing that 18G HDBaseT technology is doing. It compresses at the transmitter and then extends over Cat5 at 10.2 gigabits per second to be decompressed at the RX unit, and the display shows you an 18 gigabit per second signal. So that's how the 18G HDBaseT technology works as a whole. Now, we did find, though, some issues with that technology that we at KeyDigital were able to improve upon. And so therefore we give to you KDX444L's 10G pass-through. Now this is very important, because you say, oh, okay, well, whatever we got to do to get it working, 18G over a cat wire with that compression. However, the chips that are out there doing this compression all have the same behavior, but KeyDigital's engineers were able to to reverse engineer that technology. And so where competitors actually compress all signals, so if you're starting with a 10.2 gigabit per second signal and sending that over those sets, then it would equal 5.1 gigabits per second. But you don't need to compress a 10G signal, only an 18G signal. So KeyDigital's X444L is able to pass through a 10G signal or any signal less than or equal to 10G, whereas all the competitors that we've seen are actually compressing every signal that goes through those parts. So it becomes a big problem because anytime you're not doing 4K, you're compressing your signal. 4K 18G gets compressed, that makes sense, but it doesn't make sense to compress it otherwise. And it's certainly not something that you'd like to experience, because that compressed signal we know from the old days of HDMI. If you're compressing a 10G signal, you could end up with color banding and that sort of issue. So you've maybe seen this before using some 18G extenders, that it just your gradation of your colors, like your sunrise and sunset videos, those you kind of see that banding in there, and that's something that KeyDigital's product will not give you. Now, in addition to these products and their abilities to extend 18G signals, what are the other tools that help enable those kind of systems? Well, both of these products have an updated EDID library. So our engineers have now implemented HDR as a part of the 4K handshake on these parts. So this is very, very important, because previous 4K handshakes that don't have HDR on them would mean you'd have manual setup of your 4K sources in order to, you'd have to go in their menu in order to output the HDR. So this is more like connecting directly to an HDR supported 4K display. So very, very nice here. We just set the EDID dial is how you access the 4K handshakes. You set it to setting 7, 8, 9, A, B, C, or F, where you have 4K at 60, 4K with various audio formats, 10G, 18G, or 4K at 30. And so you don't even need the 60 frame handshake. You could still do 4K at 30 and reap the benefit of this EDID file with HDR. And so now you don't have to worry about the setup menu of your video sources any longer. Another very popular feature on these products, a troubleshooting tool if you will, is the forced hot plug detection. Now, although this doesn't necessarily have anything to do with HDMI 2.0A or 18G signal, we find that this is very, very important, as especially as all these new source devices and display devices are coming out, and the behavior of these various devices is not quite standard yet. You're able to force hot plug detection on our unit's HDMI connectors. And if you're not familiar with hot plug detection, we talk about the EDID handshake, for example. Well, before the handshaking ever even occurs, hot plug detection is sent downline from the display to the source, and it says, hey, you have a live partner on the other end of this cable. We need to begin our handshaking process. And that will then begin that process, so then the display can tell the source, hey, here's my handshake, or in KeyDigital's case, we provide the handshake to the video source, and the video source will accommodate according to the handshake, the EDID file. And without the ability to force the hot plug detection, which is a unique KeyDigital feature, your source may never see a connected display which sometimes happens if you go through many layers of connectivity, etc. So we give you that ability to force it. Or perhaps your source outputs, but the display doesn't see that there is a connected source. Why would that happen? Because the hot plug detection isn't making it to the display, because it does go both ways. So this is a real unique feature to KeyDigital and a real big benefit to working with our products, because there are pitfalls in the digital video world. KeyDigital's goal is and has always been to implement and to provide you, the integrator, with as many tools as possible to resolve and overcome those pitfalls without having to roll out the van for a second trip. So there you have it. Those are the new product releases that are addressing the 18G signal and connectivity issues. Going to help you resolve those issues and integrate those systems more universally there. Distribute 4K 18G signals throughout the system. What's next? Well, you should be utilizing our very extremely valuable resource, the System Design Group, SDG. It's a free service to our partners where you can send an email identifying your sources, how many are they, what are they, and perhaps even what resolution you look to achieve out of the sources, which is one of the future questions there that I'm skipping ahead to. The displays, how many, what are the distances to each, so you could we can make sure to specify the maximum length extender if needed. Resolution, as mentioned, 1080p or 4K, 18G or 10G, and control by a third-party system or control by KeyDigital's free control app, or controlled by our Compass control system where we could integrate third-party devices as well. That's pretty much all we need. Email it over to sdg@keydigital.com and we will send you two-page system design, where page 1 we see on the left is a Visio-style drawing of the connectivity of your system. Also very, very useful in your presentations with your clients to bring this diagram. In this system, for example, we knew we had the sources: 8 DirecTV, computer, IP camera, karaoke system, digital signage computer, and an extra auxiliary HDMI input. That's 13. They have 18 individual displays plus a 2x2 video wall. And so this looks like a bar restaurant system. And we used our video over IP, KDIP 1080 system there with our video wall processor. And, you know, having information about the distances, we were able to collect that we needed to use extenders to go to the video wall monitors as well. And page 2 is a breakout of models and quantities of the KeyDigital equipment, so you could then present that to your client, page 1, and present page 2 to your KeyDigital sales rep as a purchase order after that meeting goes successfully. So that's sdg@keydigital.com, and the big news is that this also gives you another big benefit that I haven't discussed yet, is that it gives you the ability to have a factory stamp of approval that what you're trying to achieve will work with this system we've laid out for you. So to contact our system design group, email sdg@keydigital.com. If you have technical questions, email tech@keydigital.com. Sales@keydigital.com for the sales line, or 914-667-9700 extension 2 between the hours of 9 to 5 p.m. Eastern Time, as we're in our New York office. And if you're checking us out from Europe or Asia, we have contact info available on our website for our offices: KeyDigital Europe in Oslo, Norway, KeyDigital Asia Pacific in New Delhi, India. So at this time, we'll go ahead and give a moment for everybody to ask any questions they may have using the GoToMeetings panel. Please don't be shy. If it's on your mind, it might be on someone else's mind as well. I'll give a minute or two for you to type those questions out. Okay, everyone. Well, interestingly, there are no questions. So hopefully that means we addressed everything for you. Once again, we do appreciate you attending today. So if you do have any questions that might pop up later throughout the day or this week or whatnot, just send them over to tech@keydigital.com and we will answer that question for you. We do appreciate your time once again. Really appreciate you being here, taking the time to learn about our new products and the unique solutions they can present to you. And we bid you adieu.